Well, how many of you actually have the book with you tonight? Does anybody have the book? Okay. We got Steve. Oh, by the way, I just want to thank Papa John tonight. If it wasn't for him, I lost my book, and this is a big building, and it's easy to lose stuff throughout the building, and I can't find it. And thankfully, he had one that I could copy the chapter out of. So I was just curious how many people had already read this ahead of time, so I could know what I was dealing with. But anyway, Steve, so you've already read this, huh, Steve? Oh, okay. That's a totally different questions. Okay, yeah. Okay. So 10 questions to diagnose your spiritual health. Number one, read the book. No, I'm just kidding. Um, so chapter 3, we did chapter 4 last week, and kind of going back to chapter 3 because Landon and I had to switch weeks. And the title for this chapter is "Are You More Loving?" So, are you more loving? It's kind of a self-diagnosis of what's going on in your own life spiritually. Now, we're really good. We're really excellent at diagnosing other people's spiritual problems, aren't we? You don't need a book on that, do you? That comes pretty easily. But anyway, this is more about diagnosing your own problems, and this guy is pretty thorough in his writing, and he kind of doesn't let you off the hook. Just when you think you're off the hook, he throws in another sentence, and you're back on the hook again. So anyway, this is I'm going to read some quotes from the book and some scripture, and I'm going to get you guys involved a little bit too with some scripture reading. So have your Bible. I know you got some Bibles out there, so we can read some Bibles, and I will call on people if I don't get volunteers. So be ready for that. But first of all, before we get into the book, let's look at John 13:34 through 35. John 13:34 to 35. This is kind of the basis we'll take off on the chapter here. Could I get a volunteer to read that? 34, verse 34, Mike, and Ralph, 35. Yeah, split it up a little bit.
As you have, as you have loved, so you must love one another.
By this all will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another.
And I really like verse 35 there. By this will all know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. And so how do other people know that you're a Christian? Is it by how smart you are, how prosperous you are, successful, how moral you are, how faithful you are? No, it says how the love we have for one another. And that's why it's so unfortunate when Christians get ugly with one another, and it go, there's problems. And what's even worse about that is when the world sees us as believers in disunity and fighting and arguing and churches splitting and things like that. And that's even worse. So that's the main identifier of a Christian. And in his first sentence of the chapter, he says, let me get right to the point. Jesus said that love is the clearest mark of a Christian. I'll say that again. Jesus said that love is the clearest mark of a Christian. So that sets you apart from anybody. Now, non-Christians can obviously love, and we'll get into that later in the chapter. But it's a different kind of love. You have to define love and what it means biblically. Well, he lists off a lot of verses here, and we won't tackle all of these, but I'm going to try to get some volunteers to read these. Who will take Romans 12:10? Romans 12:10. Papa John, okay. Romans 13:8. Okay, Steve. Romans 13:8. 1 Corinthians 16:14. Ralph, you've already read one. How about Matthew? You got that? 1 Corinthians 16:14 back there. Galatians 5:14. Any takers on that? Okay, Ralph, we'll let you do that. Oh, Bob, you want that one, Bob? Galatians 5:14. Ralph, we'll give you Ephesians 5:2. Okay, I don't want you to feel hurt there. EPH. Yes. Okay. Now give Shane a minute to get to you with the mic between readings here. Now these are all verses about love and how they're commanded. And there's actually 13. I'm going to only do 5 of them, but there are 13. I'll give you the references for the others. Go ahead, Papa John.
Romans 12:10. Be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love, in honor giving preference to one another.
Romans 13:8. Just raise your hand so he'll know. Romans 13:8.
Owe no one anything except to love one another, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law.
Okay, 1 Corinthians 16:14. 1 Corinthians 16:14. Matthew.
Let all that you do be done with love.
And Galatians 5:14. Bob's got that up here.
The entire law is summed up in a single command: love your neighbor as yourself.
Okay, Ephesians 5:2. Last one here.
And walk in love, as Christ also has loved us and given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling aroma.
Thank you. Now, I'm just going to give you some other references. You can look these up on your own later. 1 Thessalonians 4:9 tells us to love one another. Hebrews 10:24 says, stir up one another to love and good works. Hebrews 13:1 says, let brotherly love continue. James 2:8 says, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. 1 Peter 1:22 says, love one another earnestly from a pure heart. 1 Peter 4:8, above all, keep loving one another earnestly. 1 John 3:11, love one another. 1 John 3:23, again, love one another just as he commanded us. 1 John 4:21, also, this commandment we have from him, that whoever loves God must also love his brother. And 2 John 2:5, the last one we'll look at. It says, now I ask you, dear lady, not as though I were writing a new commandment, but the one we have had from the beginning, that we love one another. So the first thing you notice here is this, there's some things in the Bible that are lightly touched on, like just an obscure thing here or there. Love is not one of those things. It's a constant, over and over and over. And that's probably not all the verses about love in the Bible, but they are definitely a good list. The writer here, he says, and I just kind of underlined some good quotes that I liked out of the chapter. It says, love is the badge and character of Christianity. Love is the badge and character of Christianity. Now, when somebody wears a badge, what does that mean? It identifies who they are. If you go into Walmart, and they got the little manager tag on, they're identifying themselves as the manager. So as a Christian, our badge should be love. Our badge should be love. And love is the badge and character of Christianity. A Christian may advance in many areas, including the ability to witness, teach, or even preach. And for Corinthians 13:1-3 says, if I speak in the tongues of men and angels, and if I understand all mysteries and all faith, and if I have all faith, if I give all I have, and if I deliver my body up to be burned, I am a noisy or clanging cymbal. I am nothing, I gain nothing without the growth and the most important Christian distinctive, love. And so Paul really lays that out strongly. So point number one in his book, or in this chapter, is number one is the decline of love. How do you diagnose the decline of love in your own life? Remember, we're diagnosing our own heart, okay? Not your neighbor's heart, and not your spouse and not your parents' heart, but your own heart. So, number one is the decline of love, and he says this. It's good. When love grows cold, our sin increasingly manifests itself, and we look more unlike Jesus. I thought that was really good. I'll say it again. When love grows colder, our sin increasingly manifests itself, and we look more unlike Jesus. Now that's a powerful sentence there. We could just spend the rest of the time talking about that. What do you think he means by that? Anybody want to expound on that? Nikki? I'll say it one more time before she. When love grows colder, our sin increasingly manifests itself, and we look more unlike Jesus. Go ahead, Nikki.
Okay. So it starts to look like it's more focused on me, and it's all about me. I had a really bad first marriage, and coming out of it, I was more focused on how he treated me and the things that he didn't do, and I was just upset. Kind of how, I loved my job in Lynchburg, but I moved myself here to Danville because at that time in my life, I felt like I just needed space. But I was focused on me at the time. That's how you know.
So when your love grows cold, it's because you're not focused on the Lord, you're focused on you. And that's easy to do because the culture today, and unfortunately, even in a lot of the Christian culture, what are they telling you to do? Focus on you, self-improvement, all these conferences you can go to, self-help, and, all these things to improve me. And there's nothing wrong with improving in and of itself, but as long as the focus is on getting better at something and not making yourself, puffing yourself up. But I thought that was a good thing. And he goes on to say in that paragraph, we lose patience easily, whereas chapter 13:4 says love is patient. Unkindness becomes common. This is when we're declining in love. Unkindness becomes common, yet love is kind. We become sinfully envious of the advantages and privileges of others, perhaps even those within our own family. Conversely, love does not envy. When challenged about our lack of love, we quickly and quite confidently list all the sacrifices and other proofs of our love. And yet love does not boast. It is not arrogant, verse 4. As our heart hardens against love, we become less courteous, especially to those closest to us, in contrast to biblical love, which is not rude. Now, how many of you work in a service industry where you're dealing with the general public? Several of you. Everybody has at some point. And when you talk about rudeness or how you're treated, you get a variety of some people are really nice to you and some people are not. But what you're trained as an employee is to treat people with respect and kindness. And you ever hear, even in the secular world, if somebody is rude to somebody, they're highly offended by that. You know, if you know Joe, unsaved person, if he goes into a store and the people working there are rude to him, like they're ticked about it. You know, they're frustrated. You know, they go online and rant about it, and they're upset about it because people expect to be treated with kindness. But that's a Christian value, even though people don't recognize it as such. And so, how much more? You know, as Christians, that should be natural. We shouldn't have to watch a training video on basic courtesy and basic kindness and how to treat people, you know, in our day-to-day life. Now, why do you think, you know, he talks about your heart getting hard, your love grows cold. What do you think, what are some things that cause our hearts to get hard and our love to get cold? Ms. Roberts? She said not spending time in the Word. That's probably number one, wouldn't you say, on the path to coldness is not spending time in the Word. I think my uncle Raymond used to always say, this book will keep you from sin, or sin will keep you from this book. You know, when you're engaged in sinful behavior, the last book on earth you want to read is the Bible, correct? You know, you're out doing sin and stuff. Hey, let's read the Bible. Then that sounds good. No. And then the second thing is you don't want to come to church. You know, when you're living in sin, this is the last place you want to come, right? Because it's convicting, and God's word's convicting, and it shows us where we're wrong and how we approach things. And so those are things. Anybody else? What makes us cold? Nikki?
In all my studies in college, because my undergrad was in psychology and my graduate degree is in counseling, they've done many studies on babies who don't get love in the NICU or in infancy, and then their heart grows cold because they stop crying. They don't get a response, so they've learned that nobody's going to come to me and meet my need. And I think that's part of human nature. It grows cold when the response you get, and it's not a good one.
Sometimes we can grow cold because of somebody hurting us. You know, somebody offends you, somebody hurts you, and they're at church, and you don't resolve it, and it goes on, and then pretty soon you don't want to read the Word, and pretty soon you don't want to go to church, and you know, it's a vicious cycle. Ralph?
Well, that's exactly what I was thinking, is a lot of times our biggest test will come from our fellow believers. And with somebody, we allow ourselves to be offended by their humanity and dwell on that part instead of, you know, they probably really didn't mean to offend me like that, but we take it the wrong way instead of just either letting it roll off or say, hey, you know, what you said kind of bothered me a little bit, and then you can deal with it, and then it's done. But that you've just allowed a wall to be built when you let their humanity bother you.
Yeah, if you're looking to be offended, don't worry, you will be. You know, it's easy to get offended, and sometimes when you have a negative perception of someone, also you're easily offended because you're almost looking to be offended by someone, you know, and you see them and everything they do, and the more they offend you, the more offensive they are. You know, you see every little thing and every flaw. I liked what you said about they're offended by their humanity. You know, we like to judge. We judge other people by their actions, but we judge ourselves by our intentions. You know, well, I intended on doing that, so I give myself a break. But when you see somebody else not do their job, you get offended by it. You know, and you get upset, but you don't know what. You know, have you ever been going through a rough day and not your best work is not coming out, and it's not, and somebody gets on you or fusses at you and or says something to you, and you don't respond well, but they have no idea what you're going through, and you like don't even care because you're upset about, you know, some horrible thing that happened in your life, and you got to go work, and you got to go act like everything's fine, and so sometimes we don't take the time to be like, hey, you know, you normally don't act like that. Why are you acting like that? You know, what's going on in your life? We don't take the time to be concerned. Now, the last point under the first section here says, the point, however, he's talking about decline, and he's talking about not growing and how to measure yourself. And he even quotes a Scottish pastor named Maurice Roberts, who observed it when it comes to growing in love. The best believers find their progress slow and their attainments meager. And you know, I think the Christian life is a lot slower than we want it to be. You know, in our culture, you know, we live in a microwave culture where we want everything yesterday. You know, when you're tapping on your phone and you get a little bit of buffering there, man, that can set you off. You know, just like, and I mean, like 10 years ago, we wouldn't even know what that was. You know, we wouldn't even have had, you know, but we get aggravated by the smallest inconveniences. And so we take that into our Christian life too. You know, we don't overcome this, and we don't, you know, we're frustrated. And a lot of people give up, you know, the cares of this world. You know, Shane and I were talking about the sower the other night in basketball, and you know, that was one of the person. They get overwhelmed by the cares of this world, and that Christianity's not worth it. I can't do it, and they move on. But it's a slow process, and this is the last point he makes under that. He says, the point, however, is not speed, but direction. I really like that. The point, however, is not speed, but direction. It's not how fast you're going, but the direction you're going. Are you going towards love? Are you becoming more loving? And I think that's a point of the chapter. Okay, point number 2 here is what kind of love? What kind of love? So he talked about the decline of love. You know, there are lots of different kinds of love. You know, we all love ice cream. You know, we're getting ready to ice cream, so that's a type of love, right? Well, that's not really what we're talking about here. And he talks about in the second part of the chapter is natural affection versus biblical love. Natural affection versus biblical love. And he says, some people flatter themselves about how loving they are. They know that nothing means more to them than their children. Holidays are always spent with family. They consider themselves good neighbors and devoted friends. As their family and circle of friends grow, their love must be growing, right? You know, if you love your family and you love your neighbors, you're growing in love. Well, an unsaved person can do that. You know, you met many of unsaved people that love their family, are very devoted to their family, and they're good neighbors. You know, I've had unsaved neighbors before that were amazing. You know, they're really good neighbors. So that's not but we measure that. If you want to measure by the world standards, you're doing great. You know, they're a good family person, a good neighbor. You know, they're good by, you know, American standards. You know, we say we love like that. But he goes on to say the Bible alone, not our heart, which the Bible depicts in Jeremiah 17:9 as deceitful above all things and desperately sick, should be our standard both to define love and to describe it in practice. I thought that was a really good statement. The Bible alone should be our standard both to define love and to describe it in practice. Too often we wrongly classify love with what the King James Version of the Bible calls natural affection. In normal circumstances, parents love their children, family members love each other, and everybody loves their friends. You know, lost people out in the world, they have tons of friends. You know, they love their friends. This is true for Christians and non-Christians alike. God made us in such a way that even in a fallen world, we naturally love certain people. Thus the term natural affection. Now, what's interesting about that, like, have you ever met somebody and you just hit it off right away, and like it was just easy to be friends with somebody? Like you never met them before, and you meet them, and you feel like you know them, you've known them your whole life, and that's natural affection. You know, you know, that could be an unsaved person or a Christian. So keep on moving here. It's kind of a long chapter, so I'm trying to get through it. Besides natural affection, there's another counterfeit that is called the "does it please me first" type of love. You know, some people love if they're getting something out of the deal. You know, it's like a salesman. You know, they're very loving and very nice and generous and courteous when they're trying to make that sale. You know, and they're getting something out of the deal. That's not love. That's just, you know, salesmanship. And sometimes, you know, we can be guilty of that, of just being nice to people, being kind to people because it benefits us. You know, that's a false type of love. There's another counterfeit type of love is the "I'll love you if you love me" type of love. This kind of love does not originate from a commitment to love, not from a desire to be like Christ, but simply dispenses love as quid pro quo. This is not Christian love. Rather, it is the epitome of worldly love. Jesus put it this way: if you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners love who love them. Jonathan Edwards portrayed it this way. He said, They're full of dear affections to some and full of bitterness towards other. They are knit to their own party. Them of that approve of them and love them and admire them, but are fierce against those who oppose and dislike them. Some show a great affection for their neighbors, the children of God abroad, but at the same time are uncomfortable towards their wives and other near relations at home, and are very negligent of relative duties. You know, so some people can show this love to their neighbor, but then they're not loving to their family. Can anyone think he is growing in love and thus becoming more like Jesus, just like those who hated Jesus? He loves only with a reciprocal love. And here's a good quote out of this. He says, "The test of Christ's likeness is not the greatness of your love toward those who love you," and listen to this part, "but the bounty of your love toward those who do not." I'll read that again for you. "The test of Christ's likeness is not the greatness of your love toward those who love you, but the bounty of your love toward those who do not." And you know, that's something I think we could all use practice in, is loving someone who does not love you. You know, and Jesus would say it, love your enemies. You know, love your enemies. And that's hard to do. You know, it's easy to say that in church. It sounds good. But, you know, when's the last time we've done that? We actively engaged in loving our enemy. You know, unfortunately, Christians have kind of become, you know, kind of hostile towards people. You know, and we live in a hostile culture where there's people divided. But we need to reach across that divide and love people in spite of their viewpoints. You know, in spite of their worldview. You know, you disliking somebody because of their worldview is not going to reach them. You know, it's just not. You know, and so that love of Christ you can show them, and to say, look, I'm going to love you in spite of how you're treating me. I'm going to show love. Because you hear Christians all the time, well, I can't believe they treated me that way. I'm not going to speak to them again. And things like that. And we can't be like that as Christians. We shouldn't be like that. And the third point is love in real life. And he gives 3 examples of love in real life. I'll try to get through these quickly. I know we're running out of time. It says, those growing in love will demonstrate it in 3 areas. So this is where it hits home here. The first, or number 1, is your love for other Christians will strengthen. When you're coming to church and you're around other believers, is your love for them getting stronger? And I think that's one of the strongest points of our church, is just the deep fellowship and friendliness of our body. As soon as we're done here, this thing will just break out into tons of talking, just immediately. But, have you ever been to a church where it's not like that? It's cold, it's quiet, everybody just scoots out? That's what keeps a church warm and growing and on fire for God. There are many churches throughout this community that are not like that. We take that for granted sometimes. So love for other Christians will strengthen. And, that's why it's important that we're here, not in a legalistic sense, like, oh, I went to church, twice, you say 3 times. I went to church twice this week, I'm a good Christian. No, it's not like that. It's that you need to be here, that you have to be here, because this is where the body is, and you're apart from the body, and you need to get back to it, and you can't live without it. That's our love for other Christians. And you can't develop that love for other Christians if you're not here. It's just, you're not going to do it. Listen to this quote under that point. He said, relationships with Christian brothers and sisters in the church become indispensable to those who share eternal life. We're to love our enemies, and we're to love other people, and we're to love our family. But that bond between another believer, there's nothing like that. There's nothing at all like that. I've been with my dad overseas, and he was training pastors in Romania. I got to go with him one time, and we walked into a room full of believers that there was one guy in there, one or two that could speak English. Everybody else couldn't speak a lick of English. They spoke, couldn't understand anything. And immediately, you knew they were believers. You just knew, by the fellowship and the love, and they were wanting to talk, and they had their Bibles out, and they were wanting to learn. We learned through the course of the week to communicate just a little bit, enough they knew a little bit of English, and we would, but it was amazing how, and I'll never see those people this side of eternity, but that bond with Christ is immediate. When you meet another believer, I have friends that I coach against that are believers. One guy in particular, I know that when our teams play games against each other, it is some of the fiercest, most competitive games you've ever seen. We had 4 of the best games this year. They're all decided by like 2 or 3 points, a couple double overtimes. But he's a believer, and he and I, after the game, will text each other. We were texting each other today. There's that common bond. It's more than basketball, okay? And we talk all the time, and we have a good time. When the game's over, we're friends, and that's that. It's not always like that. It depends on what school you're playing, but you have those. You can build those relationships. So, but number 2, the second area of growth of love is a love for the lost. A love for the lost. This is important to have that love for lost people. You know, it's great to have love for your brothers and sisters in Christ. It's awesome. But we also have to love people that are outside the fellowship, that are outside the body. We have to have that love and concern for the lost. And the third area to examine is the love for your family. Because who you are at home is who you really are. You know, we can come here and put on a nice show for everybody and smile, but what do you like at home? You know, what do you like around your family? That's where your love is really demonstrated. And the fourth point here is cultivating love. I'm going to read. How much time do I have? I feel like I'm running out of time. I don't want to go too long. I'm almost done. So I know you wouldn't mind, do you? But cultivating love. Maurice Roberts asks, why is real Christian love so scarce in this world? It is because the cultivation requires nothing less than the reversal of every instinct of our fallen natures. Love is against the grain of nature. It is against every fiber of our being as sinners. But nature in the unregenerate is under the higher power of grace. What the unregenerate cannot do, true Christians may and must do. And he goes on to talk about, he gives a story of how an unsaved person, maybe they love to watch football, but their daughter wants to go to the park. And they may choose to do that. And that looks like love. That's love, right? You know, he loves his daughter more than football, so he's going to go to the park. Well, a believer can do the exact same thing. What's the difference there? What's the difference between the believing dad who goes to the park and the unbelieving dad who goes to the park with his daughter? Yes, ma'am. Bingo. The unsaved person is like, I want to be a good father. And he is being a good father. You know, and that's good that he's being a good father. But the believing father or mother does it because they know that they're doing it for the Lord, not for themselves. Not so they can be like, you know, I'm parent of the year, you know, but I've got a responsibility, you know, before God to do that. Now, thankfully, my kids didn't ask to go to the park during a football game, but I think I would have taken them, hopefully. But anyway, he gives 5 things here. I'm going to close on these 5 things to think about at the end of the chapter. He says, first, meditate on love as the most important distinguishing mark of a Christian. So meditate on love as the most important distinguishing mark of a Christian. Number 2, let your heart be often warmed by the fire of God's love. Let your heart be often warmed by the fire of God's love. Number 3, discover assurance that God is your Father by loving as He loves. Number 4, delight in imitating God. And he's got a lot of good things to say, and this is a really long chapter. I'm sorry. Delight in imitating God. And number 5, identify those relationships where you most need to grow in love. And I think this is the most important point. We can talk and blah, blah, blah about all this stuff all we want to. But in your own heart tonight, identify those relationships where you need to grow the most in love. You know, is that your spouse? Is that your kids? Is that your neighbor, your coworker, your boss? You know, somebody at church. Where do you need to be more Christ-like? And, you know, that's very convicting. You know, this chapter is very convicting. So I encourage you, if you don't have the book yet, you ought to grab it. Yes, sir. Yeah. Number 3 is discover assurance that God is your Father by loving as He loves. Discover assurance that God is your Father by loving